Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of Coaching Conversations in Tennis with my two good friends, Voye and Frank. We've got a really exciting topic to unpack this morning, which is on the topic of technique and the role of technique in player development. So I'm gonna get into it right away and ask Frank just to kind of give his overview definition of technique and how that links to player development.
Well, thanks for that one to start with. First of all, I think technique is very important, but it's also very important to define whatever we mean with technique, because too many coaches are talking about or thinking about an ideal technique or a certain way how everyone should hit. And as we all know, it looks different with all the players. So the definition that would fit the way I look at tennis is that it's a coordinated movement that enables you to have a tactical intention. And you can have many more details in that definition, but it is about the technical principles that are in it. It's not that much the shape of the movement, and it's not about the beauty. It is about effectiveness. It's about being able to do with the ball whatever you need to do to to give a difficult situation to the opponent, to win your points, or to stay in the point, etc. So it's a lot intention driven, this movement, and you need a certain coordination to be able to do that. And the higher the level is, the more specific this coordination is tested.
Thanks, Frank. Voye, is there a different way that you explain it, which might add to the Frank's definition there?
Very similar, I have to say, only perhaps with my own words. I like to think about technique and tactic like a yin and yang. They're influencing continuously each other. And I fully agree with Frank that technique is, or the movement, when you want, is actually tactically driven with intention. And but at the same time, also available technique will give you the tactical opportunities. So these are two things together. Another, I would say, approach in defining technique is to look at the stroke mechanics through the biomechanical principles like balance, like coordination chain, like momentum. So we can look at technique from different points of view.
Brilliant. And I guess just to, if I may add my definition in for the audience, because I think it's interesting that they hear different points of view on it. The way I've always, and I've been heavily influenced by Louis Kaya on this, and I have to, acknowledge him 100% on this, is that technique is about being effective with the racket. It's a racket sport. You have to hit the ball with a racket. So it's about being effective with the racket to control the ball in the 5 ways that you can control it: the height, the speed, the spin, the distance, and the direction. And it's about being efficient with the body and the feet in order to have good mechanics, as you say, to have good momentum, good coordination, good muscle relaxation, but also to develop technique in order for it to be free of injury or free of potential injury over the long term. Because what we don't want to do with coaches, of course, is to make interventions that actually worsen the player for the long term and cause physical injuries that affect their ability to flourish in the sport. So I think, in a simple way, technique is racket work, body work, and footwork. Now, you may say footwork is part of the body, surely, because feet are part of your body. But I think it's internationally recognized that footwork is its kind of own world. There's a lot of footwork experts out there. And I don't just mean from the physical aspect I actually mean the technical aspect of footwork, the split steps, the crossover steps, the pivots, the jumps. These are all things you do with your feet as you move to the ball, as you start the movement, as you move to the ball, as you hit the ball, and as you recover. So that movement cycle, I think, is really important to describe. But, if coaches want a simple definition, in my opinion, it is about being racket work, body work, and footwork. That's what you can teach and develop in technique. But you need all those other things that you guys have talked about: fluency, looseness, coordination, in order for the player's body to be efficient, in order for the racket to achieve its intended target. So that's quite a nice beginning of unpack. So here's a question. What do you think the role of the coach is with regards to technique?
Okay, I can start. Role of the coach first. I believe that coach should be aware what he wants to achieve. And obviously, he should be also aware how the players can play the game at certain stage, because that obviously will tell him what kind of the technique players needs and which technique he can apply. Obviously, there are always like a short term, but also the long-term goals. And here I see a big difference between the experienced coaches and less experienced ones that are having difficulties to connect these two things.
Interesting. Frank, anything you think the coach needs to be aware of with regards to technique? What are the big picture red flags or roles and on-court jobs of the coach when it comes to technique?
Yeah, I agree on what Hervoje just mentioned, that you should be very aware of what you want to teach or what the purpose of the exercise is. And to say it in my own words, it means that you have to give challenging drills where you can improve the skill. You have to move borders all the time, so that it's challenging and also comforting in the way that you're sure that they can manage this and that you can take them to the next step. And too often you see that coaches believe in many repetitions, just making many hours playing. And of course you need that, but think of those people who have been playing for 50 years and still are on a recreational level. That proves that if you don't want to move your borders, you just stay on the same level, because otherwise all the old guys would beat all the young ones. And so as a coach, we have to challenge the players and move borders all the time. Players learn so quickly, especially as juniors. We all know that, we all see that, but only if you have a purpose with what you are coaching, then you can see the quick progress of them.
So I guess just my summary of what you two have said there, that I guess the role of technique within the lesson, the on-court session, that's when we do most of our technical interventions, isn't it? But of course the player will learn all the time technique. They'll learn as they play tournaments, they'll learn as they're sleeping, they'll learn in all the ways in which they experience the world: smell, see, sight, listen. So, but I think the coach has a real responsibility to observe technique, to assess, to analyze, to develop it progressively. We'll come on to that in a second. To feed back on technique, to do progressions on technique. So all of these words, which are synonymous with being with coaching, I think all link really well to technique. And I think that's essentially what you said there. And Frank, coming on to the point that you mentioned and Hervoje at the start as well, intention drives everything. What is the relationship between the tactical intention and technique? Let's just really dive into that for a second. Hervoje, do you want to start?
Thank you, Simon. Very simple for me. When my intention is to hit as hard as possible, very often I will look for some kind of the flat movement. When we talk about the forehand, pretty erratic, and very often the kids will become very tense. When I try to bring the ball back, very often my movement will be slower. I will look more for control. We'll try to be in balance. So very often, in my experience working with especially young players, the bigger issue is to actually guide their intention than actually to shape their movement. If they really have the right intention in particular situation and they're loose, most of the time they will find a solution if you create the right environment. And for me, this is really the number one thing, because when I see the kids that want to hit as hard as possible, and let's talk about 7, 8 years old kids, how we will develop a rhythmical movement? It's impossible, but it's not because he cannot do the, let's say, continuous movement with the racket, but because of his intention. Frank, can you add something? Or disagree,
yes,
please.
I like to define two elements here. When you talk about a tactical intention, you mainly use 3 intentions. So we talk about building up, hitting winners, and staying in the point, or prevent the opponent from staying in from winning the point. So the disadvantage of talking about tactical intentions is that in tactics, it's always about winning the point or not losing the point. So in order to be able to move borders technically, I like to talk about functions of the shot. And within the functions, we use the speed of the ball or the spin of the ball. And I know Simon just mentioned Louis Caillet's 5 elements of it. I discussed many years ago with Louis that I understand it, it's what we see, but actually there are only 3 elements in the ball trajectory, because the direction is 3-dimensional, so it's both to the side and up and down. And then you have the spin and the speed, and there are no more variations. So only 3, but I do agree that you can see the depth of the shot in a different way, because that's a combination of the spin or slice and the speed, etc. So by defining the function of the shot, like you want to have maximum speed flat, it will be a totally different element of practicing than if you want to increase the angle to open the court. And when it's not about the tactics of it, but just mastering the skill, it's much more safe for the player, because it's not about winning the point or losing the point. It's about being more skilled to be able to use it later on as a tactical intention. So that would be just one more, let's say, refinement in defining these elements.
So yeah, I mean, this is a really useful concept, isn't it, for coaches? Because you said something at the start, Frank, which resonated with me, is that I think we get caught up as coaches, easily so, to try and teach our players the ideal model of the technique, the ideal shape, Federer's forehand, or whoever it is, it's Richard Krajicek's serve, or we try to find the player that we like stylistically or biomechanically, and we say, you know what, all of our players should do their very best to aim for that. And what we miss is that the technique does change. The technique that you need changes and it depends on the game situation that you're in. So if you want to hit a first serve flat versus a second serve kick out wide to the backhand, it's a very, very different technique. And when I say a different technique, what do I mean by that? Well, the body work is different. On the second serve, we know more sideways on than when you turn and are more frontal on the first serve. The racket work stays on the same side of the body for longer. The tilting of the racket inwards is different. The footwork could be the same, but there's a lot of things that are different depending upon the situation you're in. And we know that there are 5-game situations for singles, and we know that there's offense, defense, and neutral skills. And when you break those down, if you attack with power versus attacking with precision, again, a very different feel of the technique is required. And perhaps as coaches, we are training too much the basic forehand versus the adaptational forehand that we need in different game situations. And I think it's more fun to coach players to be more skillful in different game situations. I'm not saying that we shouldn't develop a repeatable stroke on the forehand and backhand. Clearly that's essential, especially at 12 and under, because they need a repeatability for their focus, for their motor skill development. But even the introduction of mini tennis, what we've seen is children are being attacked and having to defend even on the red, orange, and green court. And therefore, perhaps they need some basic interventions around offensive and defensive skills that are changing in different game situations. So, sorry, it's a long ramble on that, but it's just supporting your major message here that, look, there's no such thing as the forehand. There's the forehands. And every forehand could be very different. And it's not to create a monster and overwhelm coaches, say, oh my God, I've got to teach 30 forehands now. That's not the case at all, because it's not about teaching them. It's about creating the environment and game situations where hopefully those skills, as you say, Avoye, come out very implicitly.
Okay, but now when you said that, very often then the coaches are coming with the question, but is there then anything repeatable in the strokes? So how you guys look at it? I would like to ask you a question first. How you look at it? What are actually really the things that are really fundamental and are repeatable in the stroke? We can use, let's say, forehand, or we can use serve, any of these strokes to clarify it, because there are some things that are really fundamental and not really, or the best players are trying not to change them.
Sure.
How you see that?
Yeah, let me react a little bit to your question and also to previous things that were said. One of the questions that I got most over the last, let's say, 15 years, because the players I'm talking about have been around for about 15 years, Frank, which is the best forehand? Is it Federer or Nadal or Djokovic or Del Potro? And I said, well, just ask their opponents because they will hate to play all these forehands that you just mentioned. It's very hard to say which one is better. And that's because the character of the person and the way their body is built, so their body structure, will have influence on how they move. As we all know, we all walk differently, and that's because we have different characters. And even though walking is very, let's say, simple for most people, they did research and could actually determine just by walking where you're from, like whether you're from Southern Europe or from Western Europe and Northern Europe, like that, because there's a part of our culture and character in the way we walk. Sure. Then in forehands, it's even more. So that means that there's a lot of variety there, and there's a lot of individuality there. And we need to take that into consideration when we start to work with the player, and also when we correct the player.
Just sorry, if I just add to that, Frank. I mean, it's a great question that Avoye has posed to us there, because when people think of what should be repeatable, the consistent sections of it, and the bit that I think people go to is they think of a high rally threshold, make lots of balls, be repeatable, don't miss. And they often think of rallying skills, you solid on the forehand, solid on the backhand. But to me, I think that misses a big part of the picture, which is, look, I may be able to make 50 balls in a row, deep down the middle, very consistent, technically repeatable, no problem. But when I come to then hit a high, slow, mid-court junk forehand and I want to attack with power, one's in the net, one's in the back fence, one's in, one's a winner, one I decelerate. So I'm not repeatable at all. So it's in my opinion that you need to be repeatable in neutral, repeatable in offense, and repeatable in defense. If someone keeps attacking your backhand and you miss every other shot, then they're going to find a weakness and expose that, and you're going to lose a lot of points. So for me, repeatability is about having a level of consistency in all the game situations. So consistency when you attack, consistency when you rally, and consistency when you defend. Now, the biomechanical principles that are constant are still, they are the same, but they're different same. So they're the same on the neutral one, contact point, turning your body, but they're the same in offensive. Jump and turn, more 180-degree rotation. That's what you're looking for. So there are some skills that are required and need to be repeatable, but those repeatable principles change based on the situation you're in.
What you want to say actually is the principles are staying the same, but how they are adapted to the situation is different. Like you're always in balance, but sometimes you're in more static balance.
Right.
Yeah. By the low volley, you want to be in a static position pretty much to control it, to control the ball. But if you want to hit a forehand winner, inside out behind the baseline, of course, you have to be in very dynamic balance. Otherwise, your shots will not be powerful enough. So, I think we clarified a little bit.
Yeah,
I'd like to add that for the regular listeners or viewers of our podcast, when we discussed motor learning, we, of course, touched several principles that we have in this presentation. So we agree on not going back too much to that, but those people who like to find out more about motor learning, they could look back at that presentation we did. So to add to the principles that are important, the three that come back, and just one was mentioned clearly, balance, then there's timing, and there's racket face control. And that's where I think that you need the adaptations within those three factors when you address those functions and intentions. That's where the player has to find the millions of combinations of slightly higher or lower or faster ball, and still be able to time it and to know what you're doing, so that the quality of your shot is trustworthy and that you have the consistency in being able to use that skill in a match situation, etc.
That's why it's so good to use the effective and efficiency. I'm going to revert back to it. Effectiveness of your ability to control the ball with the racket, and efficiency of the body, including the footwork. Now, you can be effective, but not efficient. You can be not effective and not efficient. You can be efficient and not effective, and you can be efficient and effective. What we're all aiming for, of course, the ultimate goal is for your players to be both very effective with the racket and the ball, but also very efficient with the body. So you have real long-term potential in the stroke. Because if I'm in a 7-year-old boy or girl and I'm serving like this, and I hit the back of the ball and I can serve to the tee, and I'm very consistent, very repeatable, Havoye, very repeat. I never miss. I never miss. Never miss. I never double fault. Very effective. But we know that long term, that's not going to be an efficient technique for the player to move to the next stage of their development. So it's always having your eyes on the prize and going, right, my player is, are they effective? Yes. Great. Are they efficient? No. Then there's maybe a necessary rationale for change. And the change doesn't have to be dramatic or extreme, and we can talk about that in a minute. But there would perhaps be a narrative for you to help the player understand that in order for them to improve, they need to do something different or make adjustments. So effective and efficiency is the goal, but it's definitely possible that someone comes to your summer camps who's an absolute beginner. They can't hit the ball. They're off balance. They're not efficient with their body, and they're not able to rally and that's the problem when children start the game. It's a difficult game because you need to be effective with the racket and efficient with the body. But they're not, because they've had less exposure to the game. So our job with the coach is to keep everything simple in order to be able to send the ball back and have nice, simple technique in order to at least serve, rally, and score. If I may, I think this does link quite nicely when we talk about technical development over time. What do you both think is the relationship between physical literacy, physical coordination, physical athleticism, and technical execution?
Who first? Me again?
Boy, far away.
Okay, let's start from my side. So for me, actually, this physical literacy is what is also very often called fundamental movement skills. And I like to call it also movement patterns. These fundamental skills are actually the base on which you can build, let's call it, technical solutions in any kind of the sport. Mm-hmm. And for sure, that one a good example is like an overarm throw that is linked to serving motion. But also other one that I don't see it's very much developed is the sideways throw. That basically is the fundamental of the forehand, modern forehand motion. Yeah. So I was recently visiting Finland, and we were having a chat about it. And I asked them to ask their kids, 9, 10 years old, to make a sideways throw. And actually none of the girls was able to do that. They were actually making like a swinging throw, but not sideways throwing motion. Yeah. But also I would say 50% of the boys. And I would say that in my generation, everybody was able to do that. Why? Because we were playing much more outside, and we know that nowadays the new generation is not playing so much outside. We were actually trying to hit each other with the stones, and you were trying to hide behind the tree. And what is the way? Our solution is actually to make a sideways throw, keeping your body behind the tree. So actually nobody was teaching us these things, but by looking at the others, copying, of course, some solutions from the others, especially the older ones, and having a time to discover it by ourselves. I think it was something what was normal. And nowadays, I see it also through my son, who is 10, that unfortunately, they don't develop this, I call it fundamental movement patterns. And obviously, it's failing when we come to any kind of sport, and especially the one like tennis, that is, from coordinative point of view, pretty demanding.
So what actually is happening when you say it's failing, Havoye, when children have poor fundamental movement skills, coordination, balance, agility, eye-hand coordination, eye-foot coordination, when it's not good, what is the direct impact on their technical development, do you think?
One thing that first of all, they cannot find a solution.
Right.
They cannot find it because they don't have a fundamental for this. And second thing, that very often, because then they are taught in this movement, they're taught the movement, you see very mechanical, robotical movements with very tensed arms, for example, by the forehand. And they just cannot relax. When we think about this environmental actually theory about technical development, where they say that it's about finding a solution from the actually possibilities that are there. and there are so many options that our arm can move. So what the kids do at the beginning, and they do it always, is actually that they start to freeze. They start to freeze to actually decrease the number of options. Mm-hmm. But now with actually having these fundamental movement skills, they will have the opportunity to find a way actually to actually use these possible movements in order to find the right solution. And then later in the final stage to actually use it in different ways, to adapt it in different ways in order to solve the different situations.
Interesting.
So I think without that, very often I believe that the kids are tense. I see it very tense because they don't have the opportunities. When the kids have the opportunities already from somewhere, they will use it to find a solution.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that many years ago, I heard a very nice way to explain about those basic forms of movement. What the specialist said was, if you would drop some babies on an island in such a way that they would survive, no danger, etc., and you would come back after 15 years, they would all have these basic forms of movement, like climbing a tree. They would walk, they would also run. They would also throw and catch. For example, coconuts on an island, they won't play football with that. So football or tennis, those are thought out games. That's what we invented. But on an island, children would not at first do that. Yeah. But they will learn a huge variety of movements just to survive and to escape from animals or each other or whatever. And the example you gave, Hervoy, about throwing sideways, that's like hiding behind a tree and do that. It's something that will just happen. And this touches the way that coaches would teach tennis. If you tell them exactly how to move, there's no freedom to explore the other options. Yeah. So the link between natural freedom in moving and then going to specific tennis techniques is an essential one. And we often, in the past, we all believe that we should teach immediately the kind of final movement that the youngster would have being 20 years older. So I teach the 4 or 5 year old exactly the forehand Federer hits, because that's the smoothest one and that's really good. And then we limit them to explore and find out that actually the racket movement helps them to find all kinds of solutions in the game to win points or not to lose points.
I just would like to add,
sorry, please.
There is a saying that I believe both of you are very familiar with, that form follows function.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's very important to keep it in mind that actually the form will come if the player have the right intention and the efficiency of the movement or function of the movement is there. Then mostly the shape of the movement will be appropriate, or at least it will be individual stylish, but it will be functional.
Yeah. I have one more thing to add after what Simon said about the efficiency of the movement. And there's one dangerous element there for us as coaches, because we know about injuries, we know about the fluent movement and easy swings, etc. But also, we are often limited in seeing through the movement. And I never forget when Björn Borg played really different than all previous players did. In the club, this is one of the Swedish stories from the local coach. A guy came by and there were like 8 kids on court. And the other coach said, who is that? And he said, oh, don't watch that guy because he has a terrible technique, but yeah, he just beats everyone. and that's Björn Borg. And that is quite funny that people thought he can never play tennis for a long time because he will be injured. And he, as far as I remember, he didn't have that many injuries. And when you think of Nadal, he uses so much energy and there's so much, let's say, stress on the whole body because he has this high intensity hitting. And then people thought that he also would not play longer than the age of 28. And as we know, today he won the semi-final again, and he's there as being 35 years old. He's still doing well. He had injuries, but not the ones that people expected, like in the arm, etc. So it's interesting that for us, we often overestimate or something, the stress on the joints. And this is what has to do so much with the body. And of course, Nadal has a very strong body and a different body structure than, for example, Medvedev. I mean, that's so obvious. They hit totally different.
I mean, just to bring maybe a more current example up to that. Well, first of all, the Nadal one's a really good one, because I know in his early career, and Warren Pretorius did that research on his forehand. Do you remember he was leaning back a lot on his forehand, and he was arcing his back, and he was starting to get niggles in his body. So I know that was a technical change that he made to be much more balanced and much straighter with his upper body, because constantly doing this whilst you're leaning back, there's obviously going to be an effect of that long term. Maybe not when you're young, but it's a bit like Rafter, Rafter with his serve when he went up on the same side and he had massive rotator cuff injuries. Okay, it's not so bad when you have 50 million in the bank and you're living in Sydney Harbour Bridge. But my point is that when he was playing, he was always suffering from injuries. And in the end of career, what happened to him on his first serve is he just started to kick more and more. So he started just to roll the ball in on his first serve as well as his second serve. Not always, not every tournament, but you definitely saw that emerging because he was just having so many injuries on his upper body. So there's that, Frank. But the other one to bring up today is the interesting debate right now is the idea of sliding on acrylic. So people have been sliding on clay for years and years and years, and you can slide before contact, during contact, or slide after contact, which is when you're in more of a defensive situation. Now, what you're seeing the emergence of now, and I don't know if it was Djokovic that did it first, but certainly from the tennis that I've seen, it was Djokovic that was doing it a lot, who obviously moves incredibly well. And I've seen Sinner doing it this week at the Australian Open, and the physical trainers are going, if someone rolls their ankle, it's going to be a disaster because when you slide on the acrylic, the friction of the court, but more and more players are doing it. So there must be a reason why they're doing it. And it doesn't seem to be causing injuries yet. Now, I don't know the long-term research and the outcome of that, but it's just to support your point that when we first saw it, we went, oh, this is a disaster. He's going to roll his ankle, break his ankle. He's going to be out of injury. And that hasn't happened. And if anyone's got any examples of where that has happened, I'd love to hear it because I haven't heard of it. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on that specific example.
Well, it links to what I just mentioned, that we are overcautious for movements that we have not seen before. And then we think, this is impossible, you cannot do that. And it appears that the human body is so flexible in adapting to situations. And that's what we have to keep in mind. So the best guideline for a coach is to try and see whether the function, the quality of the shot would be limited with this technique, to change it or not. And as long as the player can move borders all the time, you have to focus on that and not too much on that ideal movement that you've seen from one particular player that you like a lot. So give room, give freedom to the player in finding his personal way to execute that situation.
Just to add to what you were just talking, I believe that it's also the way we prepare the young players. When Bjorn Borg was starting to play tennis up to the age of 14, 15, he was playing a lot, but it was not a structure, especially not motor development, especially not what we would call conditioning. For me, it's more motor development. But nowadays, the kids at the age of 9, 10 are starting with 2-3 times per week, let's call it motor development. And here I would say, first of all, would be the stability of the joints, ankles, knees, hips. What we know, especially for the taller guys, is so important. And when they're ready for such movements, they will start to explore it because they see it, how, for example, Djokovic is moving, and they're trying to copying because, of course, they are looking at the best, and what they are doing usually is showing the way. And we know that the next generation usually start to do earlier the things that the current champions are applying in their game. And here I believe it's very important for us as a coaches to be aware about it and think in advance what I have to do in order to help him to actually be stable, to be able to control the body, even push from very, I would call it extreme situations already very young.
Yeah, interesting.
So this is thing that I believe can change the way we are thinking and then prepare the players for these extreme movements. For sure, that will be even, the game will become even faster and the players will hit faster, so they should be ready.
I think just as a summary point to this specific question on physical literacy, there's an old adage, which is you won't be able to do it technically if you can't do it physically. And that's both true and not true, because I remember Greg Rudetsky, when I worked with him at the LTA, asking him to throw a ball. It wasn't particularly, I mean, I was throwing the ball further than him and with better technique. He hadn't done a lot of throwing, but clearly he had one of the best serves in the world. So that's an interesting discussion in itself. But principle speaking, I think it's a fair assumption that you can't get a 3-year-old to tie their own shoelace. They just are not ready to do it yet. They do not have the fine motor skills that is required in order to do something so specific. So when we ask a 5-6-year-old to do a second serve kick, that's clearly not an appropriate skill that they get ready to do. So there is a physical link to what children are able to do. That's fair. Now, Judy Murray said something to me once. I want to get your opinion on this. And it really left an impression with me. She said, Simon, I think we sometimes take the game to children too early. We take the game to children too early. We try to get them to rally and to serve, and they just don't have the coordination or the physical skills in order to hold the racket and hit the ball and do that. What are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't agree on it, because as we mentioned earlier, kids want to be challenged. And if you as a coach know what kind of task you're giving, and there's no worry about that. You can take that in the game. But I would agree with Judy when it's about competition and talking about rankings and the winning, and where kids are so much concerned about winning or not losing that they don't get the freedom to explore all the possibilities in the game. So there's two sides to it. And it's very important how we as adults, whether it's as a parent or as a coach, how we approach that situation, how we try to influence the kids, how we help them, and again, give them the freedom to explore, which is very different from this is the way you should play it, because that's how grown-ups do it, and that would be my reaction to that.
One more thing I would like to add here. Obviously, we didn't hear what Judy exactly told you, so we are assuming or interpreting your words. But I would fully agree that nowadays, for majority of the kids, the age at which they are starting, 4, 5, 5.5, 6, is too early because they are not motorically ready. And for the kids, it would be much easier to start, for regular kids, it would be much easier to start tennis at the age of 7, 8. And from my experience, I can say that usually what they learn between the age of 5 and 7, they can learn with more intensive approach, let's say 3 times per week, immediately, inside 2-3 months. And so personally, and with my son, actually, my own experience, I believe he started at least 1 year too early. But he started because a good friend of mine had another son also. And he said, my son started to play, and would you also bring your son because he's alone? And then I bring him, but I said, of course, I will bring him, but I would like to be in charge because I don't want them to be taught forehands and backhands movements, staying in the lines and, all these things. But then I was actually observing, and basically in this first year, what they learned, they would learn in 1 month after 1 year. So I believe that to really go to these fundamental sports like gymnastics and some other, gymnastics for me is the first one and the best sport for the kids to do because they learn to control their body. When you put a racket in the hand, obviously it's for them much more difficult. And so if this is also what Judy taught, I would fully agree that for majority of the kids, we really start a bit too early with this sport. But there is a big but. We know that all the sports are fighting for the kids very early. And then, of course, the sport that, especially in Croatia, I believe also in your countries, is really difficult to beat is the football.
Yeah.
And obviously, to start to play football at the age of 5, no problem. They can play a game. They all run after the ball, but they have fun because they understand actually the scoring. You have to put the ball into the goal, and it's so easy for them, so much fun, and they're all together. Compared to tennis, with this, especially when you really start to play tennis in terms of bouncing ball, you have to develop your receiving skills that you can catch the ball after the bounce. And we know that for many 5-6 years olds, that's an unbelievable difficult skill. And for me, that would be, if you ask me, that would be for me a test. If somebody cannot catch the ball, foam ball after the bounce, perhaps it's not really necessary to start to play tennis. But if you want to keep the players and to attract them to tennis, it's more like I would call it business point of view, that they accept that in tennis schools they will accept also very young kids and try to keep them, and with the appropriate program, I believe we can keep them in our game.
I mean, brilliant points from both you, Avoya, and Frank there. And God, we could talk about that one question for an hour and a half easily. Just to take a time, I want to move on to, because it links so beautifully to the next theme that I wanted to capture today, which is age and stage appropriate technical development. I mean, Avoya, would you mind sharing your vision for technical development with players? And then maybe Frank and I can add some things onto that.
Okay. So when I'm thinking about technical development, I always think about that I want to see kids playing the game at any level. It can be even floor tennis, but they're playing, they're rallying the ball. Yeah. Then for me, the second pillar when I'm thinking about the technique is to look at intention with which they're striking the ball. For the young kids, we would, of course, like to see that intention is to cooperate, and that's not very easy for them. Then the third element is actually related to what you talked before about controlling the racket and the ball. And here for me, the main element is actually connecting perception with the movement. Because in tennis, the biggest problem is actually to align your movement with incoming ball.
Yeah.
So that's the thing when I'm thinking about starting to develop technique by the young players that we have to be aware about. And I would say that it's very important to keep them loose. Let's say like this, to keep them loose, to give them some opportunity to look for their own solutions in the appropriate environment. So I would like to start with this, and then obviously after hearing from your side, your opinions and the thoughts, would be nice to continue.
Frank?
Yeah, nothing to add to that. I agree on those, let's say, stages. It's actually in line with what we discussed in our presentation on motor learning and what we discussed today. So I'm happy with that.
So for me, it's such an important question, this age and stage appropriate technical development. What does change over time? You know, if it's a young coach listening to this that, you know, maybe they're not experienced and they're working with players under 10s, you know, teenagers, Tennis Europe, ITF, you can have different ages, different stages of your development. Let's really pin down what we believe evolves and what the coaches should be looking to develop technically as players progress. Maybe that's a slightly different way of putting it, which will bring out even more rich discussion. Do you want to, Frank, do you want to add to that first of all?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, when Roy mentioned the perception element, we know that the visual system is not, let's say, completed in the development until the age of about 12. Some people say 10 and could be a bit later, but that means that you cannot learn everything that other, or let's say older players would be able to learn because of that limitation. Then starting from that, let's say the system is more developed so that you can move borders. It's more about the training. So after 12 or about 14, you can see that kids really improve so fast. There's a physical development because of puberty. There's, of course, a lot of matches coming up, etc. So there are a lot of elements influencing their development there. And I think it's essential to understand that those are different phases. And sometimes, again, back to the adults, we as parents or as coaches expect far too much at the young age, when the systems, let's say the brain system is not that much or not enough developed to be able to handle situations that are needed on the level of 14 or 16-year-olds.
It's a good one, is it? Because I remember coaching a girl. She was a national level player. She wasn't the top, but she was in the top 16. And her mum used to say to me, "Look, Simon, she's getting killed out there. Her serve's getting attacked. You've got to help her get a faster first serve." And she was only 11, 12 years of age. And I said, "Look, Mum, I want her to have a faster serve, but she's just not ready yet." It's linked back to the physical topic we talked about earlier. There's a physical. She hadn't gone through puberty yet. She was smaller than her peers, and she wasn't generating the same kind of ball speed on her serve as the other girls. I mean, the mum was absolutely right, but the mum was wrong to think that I could fast track that physical development. There's a lot of natural wins in technical development, and the natural wins, as you say, come through the teenage years when children grow from kids to teenagers and adolescents, and they just start spanking the ball, and you think, wow, where did that come from? Their arms become faster, their legs are stronger. And yes, there needs to be physical development alongside that, with the trainer and with the coach doing good warm-ups, cool downs on the road or back at base. But you have to be so careful. The big picture on this to me is be so careful trying to fast track power and speed when the player hasn't gone through those teenage years and through puberty, whereas a lot of it's going to come naturally. Voye, anything you wanted to add regarding age and stage relevant technique?
When we are talking about this between us as a coaches, very often we are looking for some kind of the recipes.
Yeah.
To start with the grips, to start with the contact point. And obviously you both guys are not mentioning that at all. And now I'm thinking about our audience when they would listen to us and they say, but these guys never said anything about that. Mm-hmm. So I would like to link it with your question with appropriate age technique. And for me, it's like you said before, it's related to effectiveness. Can I control the ball? But for controlling the ball, it's an intention again. So I have to develop right intention. And for me, what I'm looking always is that I see the relaxed body. Because when the players are tense, very often it's a consequence of fear of not hitting the ball. Mm-hmm. So creating this also environment, what they call it also errorless learning, I think can help a lot. And that it's very far away from the traditional way of teaching movement, that it's opposite. That would lock the movement. And then by actually realizing how the players develop when they have a good balance, and actually when we are in a good balance, that means that we are using appropriate stance. Yeah. So now we are coming back to, if you as a coach are aware about the function of the stroke at different ages, then obviously you will know which are the technical elements, also the movements to look at. Example, of course, at the young ages, 7, 8 years old, we like to see them in more, I would call it static position by hitting, compared to after 11, 12, 13. If they are going for competitive tennis, you would like to see them in much more dynamic.
It's a great example.
Situation. So that would be for me. And why? Because they have to move faster. And then when they want to add this 180 degrees trunk rotation into the shot, that will probably come after the age of 15 when they can control such a movement. I think this rotation is a good example when the coaches are teaching that young players, and then basically they move, if these are the feet, they move with the feet and not really with the trunk. Because the trunk is moved for 180 degrees, but because it starts from the legs, and actually they are ready after the age of 15 to really control this movement. But if you start to develop this movement by too young players, their body is not able to do it in a right mechanical way. So I think this is, in my opinion, the way to look at it.
Frank, anything you wanted to add to that?
Nope.
I mean, just one thing from me. It's such an important part of coaching. Look, if I think about some of the mistakes that I've made as a coach, it would definitely be trying to teach skills that are too advanced, too young. They're not ready for it. Maybe not even young is the right. It's the stage of a player's development linked to their physical literacy, which is what Frank said, linked to their body, the way they walk, the way they move, their level of coordination and athleticism. because you can do more advanced things with more advanced athletes, but with athletes that are not quite as good, asking them to do advanced things is a car crash, in my opinion. You actually make them look worse, and you don't improve their performance for the short term or the long term. So, going slowly with players is as important, Frank, in my opinion, as pushing borders and doing advanced things too young. I think that's a real caveat that I wanted to just add into that. That I know that loads of coaches would have tried to teach the kick serve to children too young, and then they're getting frustrated that the ball isn't kicking, but the technique of staying sideways and going up fast it requires such physical strength that actually it's not a low-hanging fruit for that player. So maybe just developing a nice topspin second serve or a hybrid top slice would be more appropriate for younger players that are looking to really get that kick up and out of the court on the outside. Just an example of that. So let's finish on a couple of things. How do we? This is such a good question. How do we as coaches know when we are changing a player's technique versus their idiosyncratic style? If you think about Gulbis, the Silver Surfer, the way he points his arm down, or Del Potro's straight arm, or Gonzalez, whose racket strings are pointed. As you said, every player's technique can look very, very different. And is that their style, or is that the principle of their movement, the biomechanics, the fundamentals? Let's unpack that for a coach to make sure that they're not changing the stylistic movement of the player, but they're actually improving the technique.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the most difficult things in our jobs, is like, when do we decide to leave Del Potro with the long arm, or have, let's say, Nadal, who has a shorter arm, and how to think of that for the future. So imagine this boy is 12 years old and has these movements. What can you do with it? So there, again, for me, would be give them challenging tasks to see whether they can still speed up the racket, can still handle balls on higher or lower contact points and things like that, so that their movement is still natural and they get the possibility to explore what they can do. And as soon as you see limitations, then you have to look at biomechanical principles behind it, like why can the player not do this or that? And too often, we as coaches have thought that a short swing like Jim Courier, that's not good. It should be longer, but it should not be as huge as Robin Söderling's forehand, because with that you can never play well on Wimbledon. Yeah. Well, he reached the semifinals there. So, there's so many things that we think are correct, and you shouldn't do it like this or like that. And the only way is to challenge them to solve the situation that you give them. And of course, it should be linked, as Simon just said, it should be linked to the phase of their development, like their age, what can they handle? Because you can, of course, ask a 12-year-old kid to try and serve the speed that Nadal has in the serve, and it's really too early. You can't, so it would be frustrating. And then we as coaches can tell them, yes, but your technique is not good. If you do like this, then in 15 years from now, you will have a great serve. But that's not how it works.
I mean, it's funny because I have to be honest. I'm fessing up here. If I was working with Rafael Nadal at 12, 10, 11, and I saw him doing this, I think I would have been likely to be the coach that changed it to a traditional follow through on the other side of your body, because historically speaking, that's what everybody does. And therefore, why on earth should I be the innovator of technique because I couldn't muck it up? And look, if everyone puts their hand on their heart, they probably also would be more in my camp than Uncle Tony, who let it fly. He ran with it.
No, he tried to correct it.
Oh, that's what right? He tried to. Oh, I didn't know that.
That's what he said. He said he wanted him to follow through, but he just didn't.
And in the end, you don't fight.
Probably he realized that he's very effective with this, what he's doing, and winning the points. And here, I would like to just join your discussion, guys, if you let me do that. So when I see the coaches that are coaching the movement and looking and focusing on the shape of the movement, and I'm not looking at effectiveness, then I think we can say that they're coaching the style. Like, for example, you can say, okay, when I bring my arm up and hit the serve, yeah, it's much better that he goes from down up. Yeah, that he has this position of the, and we would agree, yeah. But now if somebody is coaching the arm movement and position of the shoulders, I would call it's more like a style. But if you teach him a function to throw for a ball upward, then you are working on the function, and you will obviously increase the possibility to develop spin to the ball. So this is one thing. Also, when I look at the coaches that are comparing very often the movement of their player with the model, then I would say they're focusing on a style. But when they're really thinking what we said at the beginning about effectiveness of the shot, what I have to achieve, and look at efficiency and effectiveness of the movement, as you describe it, then obviously we will give them different, I would call it drills, and we will focus them on different things. And then we will work really on their own function of the movement, where actually their style will emerge for sure. And we all know, and I would say agree, that this is the best way for the young player to actually find his own best style. Yes, Frank, you disagree, I see this time.
No. I want to add to it that there's the danger side on it. And the danger side is when you think of effectiveness now, and the kid is 10 or 12 or 14, you also have to look at the possible effectiveness later. And in the Netherlands, I've often been accused of the fact that I think technique is not important. And I often defended myself by saying, probably I think technique is more important than most coaches think, but I don't think that much about the ideal movement or the nice looking shape. I'm looking for both the effectiveness now, where I can challenge the player, and the possibility to think of the longer term effectiveness. Because when you have like a Western grip on your serve, a Western forehand grip, and you can kind of hammer for that level, you can hammer the serves pretty well to the forehand and backhand, you know you will be limited so much for the future, because you will never be able to hit a topspin serve with that grip. You can never have, let's say, the variety of the slice and the kick serve, etc. So effectiveness on the short term is no guarantee for effectiveness on the long term. And that's what you have to keep in mind. That's why this is such a difficult thing. And that's why most coaches prefer to get the recipe of this is the way to do it well, and then you will be okay on the long term.
Just to jump in and actually to reflect on what you mentioned before, Frank, and you mentioned Del Potro's forehand. When you talked about long arm, I was thinking you were reflecting on his forehand, the way he prepares, make the backswing on his forehand. But there is a nice video when he was 14 playing against Cilic in the Orange Bowl finals, and the 14, he didn't have that type of forehand backswing. So he was actually having, I would call it what we say today, much more close to this ATP style. And nowadays he has more close to the, I would call it almost the WTA style with more straight arm and so on. So why I'm mentioning that, because I would say that he changed the style of his forehand according to the game he developed, because when he was 13, 14, he was not as strong as he was later on. And obviously he has the ability, he has such a strong trunk and shoulder that he can keep still the racket at the side of the body with a straight arm and accelerate it. And with this movement, he is able to hit a lot of penetrating deep shots. What is more, I would call it female way of playing the game, without saying that he cannot do something different. It's not that. But obviously his style is actually aligned with his game style. And that's something what I would also say that coaches have to have in the mind, is actually when they are developing young players, what is the personality of the player? If he's a personality that needs more variation, or will be more like a power guy, there are different ways to play tennis. Please, Simon.
What's interesting that you said then, that's got me thinking, Voye, it's a brilliant point, because I think a lot of the stylistic things that we see on the TV from the professionals actually started to merge out of being already good players aged 12, 13 up. It wasn't like they were playing around with the style at mini red. Like Roddick tells the story. I mean, if you look at Roddick's serve when he was 13, very traditional, long backswing. It wasn't until he was like going through puberty that he started to explore and experiment. Is it catching off the Russian guy with the forehand that's a bit like this? You know, it's a very different way of preparing the racket. But I've seen footage of him when he was a junior. He didn't look like that. Rafa didn't do that at Tarbes very often. He was following through. So I think there's something in this idiosyncratic style that players' movements are being evolved and explored naturally through the teenage years. And that's maybe when we should be careful not to begrudge them playing around with. I think children are naturally exploratory. They are, I'm going to do Roddick serve today. Oh, now I'm going to do Maria Sharapova's forehand. And we should let them play around with modeling and mimicking different play. Some coaches hate that. Oh my God, my player came back from the tournament. Now they're trying to do the Murray serve and they get so stressed by it. And I'm just like, no, this is amazing. It's natural for children to try and mimic each other and do impersonations of one another. Of course, not forever, not in a tournament, but let them play around with what works for them. And then maybe they like a foot up serve, maybe they like a foot back serve, or maybe they like an abbreviated action, because the first time we saw abbreviated actions, that would have looked very strange in comparison to slicing your toes, nice down together, up together. All of a sudden, when we start to disassociate the arms, that we see much more now in the modern pros with abbreviated takebacks, it would have looked very, very strange. And hopefully now we're normalizing the idiosyncratic styles that we're seeing out there. Probably a good place to end. We've gone over an hour. Anything you guys want to just add as a summary note there to the coaches from today's webinar on technique?
Yeah, from my side, just technique is very important. And without good technique, you cannot be an effective player. It should be always considered as a tool for tactical, finding some tactical solutions. And we should actually, as a coaches, be aware about the mechanics of the biomechanical principles that are behind the fundamentals of all the strokes, and then to understand when to allow players to look for the different options and find their own style that will be aligned with the way to play the game, their game style. That's from me today. Frank?
Right, I'd like to refer to one of the things Simon mentioned earlier. When you gave the example of Greg Ruzetsky, his big serve, and then let's say relatively weak throwing action. I like that example so much because we had Brenda Schultz, who was in the top 10, and she had at one stage the fastest serve in the world. She could throw like crazy, really better than all the guys, and that was amazing, really good. But what happens then is that coaches say, you see, if you can throw well, if you can have this overhand throw, then you will have a good serve. That's why I'm so happy with your example of Ruzetsky, because it's not automatically leading to the good serve. And that's where for the basic forms of movement, so under 12, teach them everything, as we discussed earlier with the sideways throw that I like the example of, by Hervoye. But then when you see that the development of that serve is not going that well, don't think you can improve the serve when they're like above 14 by throwing actions with the ball.
Brilliant
Frank,
example.
there's just one thing I have to add, Simon. You have to know that Greg is a very nice guy. I had a mention to meet him and to know him also, and he was just letting you win. So don't worry, this is not a good example.
Yeah, that's probably true, guys. That's probably true. Well, look, thanks to the two of you for giving up your time. And we hope that this webinar has been of some use to coaches that want to that have lasted the whole hour plus 5 or 10 minutes. We're looking forward to our next webinar. That's going to be in a few weeks. If you have any questions, please drop it in the function on YouTube, and we'll definitely get back to you with our answers. So we look forward, and please share this webinar with your network of parents, players, coaches that you work with. We really want to try and give some of our insights to the world and make a global difference. So have a great week, everyone, and look forward to the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.